Is it the end of the world yet? As you would remember, Bill Gates makes a number of alarming assertions. According to him, we have to reduce global net emissions of greenhouse gases to zero by year 2050. If we don't, very bad things will likely happen. For instance, deforestation due to forest fires will increase, rainforests might completely disappear. Natural disasters such as hurricanes will become much worse. Worse yet, Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets might collapse. We might have to abandon many coastal cities. Crop yields might decline, causing massive food shortages and perhaps global famine. The temperate zone, which is most suitable for human habitation, might shrink substantially due to heat waves and drought, and an unprecedented wave of migration might sweep the world. In the previous lecture, I touched on some of the scientific reasons for being skeptical about at least a few of the above. The data so far doesn't substantiate significant increases in extreme weather events such as hurricanes, tornadoes, and drought. Sea level rises have been relatively modest. What's more, simulated climate models might not be as reliable as they are represented to be by some. The author of the book we just started reading, Michael Shellenberger, also thinks that the claims listed here are exaggerations. They might even amount to what he calls environmental alarmism. He doesn't provide a definition for this term, but as far as I can tell, environmental alarmism is the systematic exaggeration and misrepresentation of facts surrounding environmental issues such as climate change. Of course, Bill Gates looks like a moderate when you compare his warnings to statements by some others. For instance, in his Oscar-winning documentary An Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore claims that sea levels may rise 20 feet in the near future. If that were to happen, almost every coastal city will be partly or completely submerged. Or take Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who claimed in a January 2019 interview, "The world will end in 12 years if we don't address climate change." As of my recording this, AOC's Armageddon is less than 9 years away. Or take the famous Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, who said bluntly, "I don't want you to have hope. I want you to panic." All three figures here, and many other environmental activists, believe that we may soon reach a tipping point, which may trigger a global environmental catastrophe and kill billions of people and countless other living beings. Are they being alarmists? Shellenberger thinks so, but he's not easy to pigeonhole as your run-of-the-mill climate change denier. After all, he acknowledges that the climate is changing due to an anthropogenic greenhouse effect. What's more, he also admits that climate change is likely to have undesirable effects in the long run, especially if we don't take steps to address it and adapt to it. But he thinks that the talk of climate change killing billions is just hyperbole. In fact, according to him, climate change hasn't even made natural disasters worse yet, which is a claim we examined to some extent last time and will continue to look at today. Shellenberger also thinks that the rhetoric of a tipping point is speculative. The risk of a cataclysmic chain of events that can collapse the Earth's ecosystem or human civilization is comparable to a large asteroid impact or supervolcano eruption. He is also skeptical of many, if not most, environmentalist causes and organizations. He thinks that they are misguided and will likely cause more harm than good. Nonetheless, Shellenberger agrees with those like Bill Gates that we must strive towards lowering emissions and adapting to a warmer world. Still, he disagrees with most environmentalists about how to do this. According to Shellenberger, the best way of this is rapid economic growth, which often requires environmental destruction in the short term. To better visualize the empirical disagreement between those Shellenberger accuses of being alarmists, let's lump them together as Team AOC. Here I'm using a broad brush, and I'm definitely attributing views to people they might not hold. My goal isn't accuracy. I'm just trying to flesh out what Shellenberger finds objectionable. Then there is Shellenberger's position. The two camps agree about one thing. Climate change is real and it's caused by human activities such as agriculture, industrial production, and transportation. But they disagree about pretty much everything else. Today we will examine the issue of forest fires and deforestation. Environmentalist organizations such as Greenpeace claim that climate change is accelerating forest fires and putting us on a trend towards an Earth where most forests will be destroyed. Shellenberger thinks that this is wrong for several reasons. Let's examine them. As you know, forests are flammable. How flammable depends on the particular plant species occupying a forest and how much fuel is packed per acre. But looking at the statistics, it's clear that forest fires increased over the last several decades, especially in the western United States. So detection has been achieved. Here, many people jump to the conclusion and attribute the increase to rising temperatures and aridity, which is also an effect of climate change in some regions. However, attribution is a difficult matter to sort out because we are looking at a set of confounding variables which make it difficult to identify a single or even a primary cause of forest fires. First, there's the effects of climate change like increasing temperatures and how dry the air and the forests themselves are. But then there's the fact that forests in the western United States are now more packed with plant material than they used to be. This is because we preserve our forests much better, which means very limited logging. What's more, unlike 40 years ago, most states have dedicated and sophisticated forest firefighting units, which put out most fires before they can spread. So, dead and dry plant material pile up, which would have been regularly cleared up by fires if we didn't interact with forests at all. So fires could be getting bigger because of our effort to protect the forest from fires. Finally, human population, infrastructure, and habitation are on the rise. This leads to more chances of humans accidentally or intentionally starting fires. It also makes fighting fires more difficult. In densely populated areas such as the Pacific coast, firefighters often have to focus on protecting the population from the fire rather than minimizing the forest area burned. Trying to tease out the impact of such confounding factors is tricky. The common narrative that climate change is turning forests into deserts is overly simplistic. Luckily, there are scientists who analyze the issue and identify the impact of various factors on deforestation. As you can see, globally, the effect of climate on forest coverage is much smaller than humans destroying forests primarily to make room for crops and pastures. The vertical lines are climate, by the way. The slanted lines are humans cutting down or burning forests to make room for agriculture. And in higher and lower latitudes in both hemispheres, climate change actually helps forest growth. I'm linking the paper I got this graph from in the video description. So let's focus on us, the humans, and what we are doing to forests. Let's look at the ongoing destruction of the Amazon forest, which spans several countries, the largest of which is Brazil. What you see in this map as yellow, orange, and red spots are the areas where significant forest loss has happened recently. These losses are due to a practice called slash and burn agriculture. Here's how it works. You cut down all the plants in an area of the forest. The plants die and dry up. Then you burn the whole area, which frees it for planting crops or growing grass to feed cattle. This sounds awful, but Shellenberger thinks that it isn't so bad. First, for many millions of people, this is the only way out of poverty. Westerners such as myself tend to have an idyllic and romantic vision of what the communities who live in these forests are like. The reality is their lives are miserable. Infectious disease is rampant. Infant mortality is through the roof. Food scarcity is a common problem. It's not the evil multinational corporations that come to the Amazon and burn it down. It is mostly the natives who do it because they want to be like you and me. They don't want to worry about dying while giving birth to a child because the nearest hospital is 100 miles away. They don't want their kids to be stunted because they can barely eat 1,000 calories a day. They want a life like ours, and they see the Amazon as the obstacle in the way. What's more, slash and burn isn't new or native to the Amazon. It happened before. Where, you asked? Answer: pretty much everywhere. The Eurasia was mostly covered in forests. Then humans cut and burned down those forests to make room for agriculture, primarily between the 10th century BC and the 20th century AD. And if you think that these Amazonian natives must have been corrupted by the old worlders, you might be wrong. Slash and burn agriculture in the Amazon predates Columbus. There is no golden age when the natives lived in harmony with the land. The ultimate lesson of anti-racism is this: Homo sapiens is Homo sapiens, and it behaves the same way everywhere. I'm linking a paper documenting the evidence. Then there is the factoid that the Amazon provides 20% of Earth's oxygen. This is simply not true. As an ecosystem, it appears to be in balance. Plants absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen. When those plants die, bacteria use the same oxygen to digest complex sugar molecules stored in the dead plants, such as cellulose, and release carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. On top of that, the oxygen generation capacity of the Amazon is insignificant in comparison to all of the algae in the oceans. Remember, the oceans make up nearly 3/4 of the Earth's surface, and they are teeming with life. The math says no. The Amazon cannot generate 20% of Earth's oxygen. If there's a truth about the relationship between the Amazon and oxygen, it is this: the Amazon serves as a carbon sink and temporary storage. But it is not all that significant. About 120 billion tons of carbon is stored in the Amazon, which is about 2 years of humanity's net emissions. The idea that we would trigger global catastrophe simply by burning down the Amazon is nothing but fiction. Next, since forest fires are a natural phenomenon, many plants adapted to it. You know the old saying, nothing can grow under the shadow of great trees. It's true. For forests to survive and replenish themselves, they need to periodically and partially burn down. And finally, Shellenberger points out that the world's total plant coverage is up, not down. In places like Western and Northern Europe, the change is dramatic. They have much more forest coverage than a century ago, in no small part thanks to climate change. Shellenberger's emphasis, however, is on the impact of humans. According to him, human-caused deforestation is not terrible. It is actually a ticket out of poverty. The aggregate effect is dramatic. Due to slash and burn, Brazil's agricultural output tripled in the last 3 decades. This should be reassuring given that many environmentalists are concerned about a decline in crop yields. Yet, organizations like Greenpeace oppose slash and burn and push for strict preservation laws to protect the Amazon. Why? Shellenberger has an explanation. Brazil's increased production depresses global food prices and threatens the farming industry interests in the United States and European Union. As a result, there is synergy, if not active cooperation, between organizations like Greenpeace and Western governments. They both oppose slash and burn because it threatens not just the Amazon, but also our own profits and privilege. Indeed, an easier target is to reforest the unused areas in Europe to make up for the losses in the Amazon. So Shellenberger is accusing environmentalists of playing into a politically driven agenda that is designed to stunt economic growth in the developing world. By pressing a double standard that prohibits Amazonians from doing what Europeans did to their forests only a few centuries ago, they are using the rhetoric of environmental alarmism to condemn them to poverty. One of the most influential political philosophers of the 20th century was John Rawls. He is famous for articulating a theory of justice that is the foundation of political liberalism in the United States. This theory is motivated by a thought experiment called the original position. In the original position, individuals are behind a veil of ignorance about their own characteristics and position in the society. So people in the original position don't know their race, their age, their religious or political views, their income or wealth. They don't even know their gender, sexual identity, or orientation. They know nothing other than the fact that they are a human being living in a society populated by other human beings. Why is the original position a useful scenario to imagine? It is useful because, according to Rawls, the principles people would embrace in the original position would also be the principles of a just society. If that's too abstract, let's think about it this way. What would those in the original position think about racist laws such as institutionalized slavery or segregation? They would be opposed to them because behind a veil of ignorance, one doesn't know which race they are. So if the society has a racist law, they might end up being a victim of it. Similarly, laws that discriminate on the basis of sexual identity, sexual orientation, or gender would be rejected by those in the original position. They would all be identified as unjust. One criticism people often raise against Rawls is that his theory of justice is too egalitarian. Behind the veil of ignorance, I don't know whether I am a scientific genius or an individual of no particular cognitive talent. Wouldn't I reject a social structure that pays Einstein, let's say, more than the guy who mops the floor at a McDonald's? Rawls thinks that this objection is based on a misunderstanding of the original position. The individuals in the original position wouldn't reject everything but absolute equality. In fact, sometimes absolute equality makes everyone worse off. If the rules don't encourage scientists to develop their ideas, for example, we won't have technology. If the rules don't reward LeBron James more than me, we won't be able to enjoy exciting basketball games. This observation is distilled into a principle Rawls calls the difference principle, which he thinks would be embraced by everyone in the original position. Inequalities are unjust unless they make the least advantaged people better off than they would be without them. Imagine a society of absolute equality. In this society, a talented engineer would not be rewarded any more than a lazy bum who smokes weed and plays video games all day. In this society, everyone would be poor because no one would be motivated to work hard. Why would the engineer break her back and make a machine that increases the harvest? Just so that the lazy potheads can binge all of it away? So people would resign to the bare minimum and everyone would live at the edge of starvation. Imagine, however, another society where the engineer who invents that machine can charge others to let them benefit from it. This society wouldn't have absolute equality because the engineer can have a standard of living higher than everyone else. In that case, however, the total productivity of the society would increase and can easily lift many others above the line of poverty. Rawls's point is that such an inequality is not unjust because it ultimately makes the most poor less poor. We can use the Rawlsian theory of justice to mount an argument for letting the Amazonians continue deforestation. The first premise says opposing the deforestation of the Amazon treats Amazonians differently than Eurasians. This differential treatment doesn't benefit the least advantaged. Instead, it harms the Amazonian poor while benefiting the first world's rich. Then we assert the difference principle. Any inequality is unjust unless it makes the least advantaged better off. Therefore, opposing deforestation is unjust. As I hope you can tell, this argument hinges on not only some empirical claims about the effects of deforestation, but also the Rawlsian theory of justice. I would like to hear what you think about both. This brings me to the end of this lecture. Send me a message if you have any questions. Thank you for your patience, and I'll catch you next time.